The certified letter trembled in Marcus Chen's weathered hands as he read the impossible fine, $1 million for unauthorized modifications to community property. His weathered face cracked into a slow, dangerous smile as he reached into his father's dusty filing cabinet and pulled out a yellow deed dated 1952, the same clubhouse they were threatening to seize. He'd owned it for 70 years, and they had no idea what was coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook's manicured lawns when Marcus Chen found the certified letter wedged between his screen door and frame like a death warrant. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the envelope's seal as coffee grew cold on his kitchen counter, steam rising like incense for the dead. "Violation notice and financial penalty assessment," the header screamed in bold red letters. Marcus's eyes, clouded with 78 years of living but sharp as a hawk's when it mattered, scanned the document with growing disbelief. "Mr. Chen, you are hereby notified that unauthorized modifications to the Willowbrook Community Center have been discovered on your property at 147 Maple Street. These modifications constitute a severe violation of HOA covenants and municipal building codes. The penalty assessment is $1,000 payable within 30 days or face immediate legal action including property seizure and criminal charges for destruction of community assets." Marcus set the letter down with the deliberate care of a man handling nitroglycerin. The community center, the clubhouse that had been the heart of Willowbrook for as long as anyone could remember. The same building where his late wife Elena had taught piano lessons to 3 generations of children. Where he'd first kissed her at the spring dance in 1965. The modifications they referenced were simple: a wheelchair ramp he'd built after Elena's stroke, a handrail along the back steps, and wider doorways so she could navigate her chair. Improvements he'd made with his own hands and his own money after the HOA had denied his formal requests for accessibility updates 6 times in 2 years. "Bunch of heartless bastards," he muttered, but his voice lacked heat. The fire had gone out of Marcus Chen when Elena died 3 months ago. Until now. His phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Bradley Hoffman from Hoffman, Kress & Associates. I represent the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. I trust you've received our notice regarding the community center violations." Hoffman's voice carried the polished arrogance of a man who'd never worked with his hands, never built anything more complex than a legal argument. Marcus had dealt with his type before, developers who'd circled Willowbrook like vultures ever since the tech boom drove property values through the stratosphere. "I got your little love letter," Marcus said, settling into Elena's chair at the kitchen table. Even 3 months later, he couldn't bring himself to sit in his usual spot. "Excellent. As you can see, this is a serious matter. The unauthorized modifications to community property represent a significant liability exposure for the association. We're prepared to be reasonable, of course. If you can arrange for complete restoration within 15 days and pay the fine, we might consider reducing the penalty to, say, $750,000. Marcus almost laughed. "You want $750,000 for a wheelchair ramp and some handrails?" "What we want, Mr. Chen, is compliance with community standards. Willowbrook has maintained its character and property values through strict adherence to architectural guidelines. Your improvements set a dangerous precedent." "Architectural guidelines." Marcus repeated the words like he was tasting something bitter. Those guidelines didn't account for a woman who needed help getting into the building where she'd volunteered for 40 years. "I understand your emotional attachment, but sentiment doesn't supersede legal obligations. The community center belongs to the association, maintained through dues and assessments. You've essentially vandalized community property." Something cold settled in Marcus's chest. Vandalized. Harsh word, perhaps, but legally accurate. Now, If you'd like to discuss a payment plan... Marcus hung up. He sat in Elena's chair for a long time, listening to the house settle around him. 43 years they'd lived here, watched the neighborhood change from working-class families to dot-com millionaires, seen modest homes torn down and replaced with glass monuments to excess. But through it all, the community center had remained constant, a place where people gathered, where children learned to play piano, where old men like him could still find purpose. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. Marcus opened it to find a young woman in a charcoal suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that probably cost more than his monthly Social Security check. Behind her stood 2 men in matching suits, their bulk suggesting security rather than legal training. "Mr. Chen? I'm Rebecca Ashworth, Senior Associate with Hoffman Crescent Associates. May we come in?" No. Rebecca's practiced smile flickered, but held. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the community center situation. We're here to clarify a few details and hopefully reach an amicable resolution. The detail that concerns me most is you people thinking I don't have a right to make my wife's building accessible." "Your wife's building?" Rebecca's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Mr. Chen, the community center is owned and operated by the Willowbrook Homeowners Association, has been since the development was established in 1987. Marcus studied her face, looking for tells. Elena had taught him to read people during their early years together when they'd played poker with the neighbors every Friday night. Rebecca believed what she was saying, which meant either she was an excellent liar or genuinely ignorant. "You sure about that timeline, counselor?" "Quite sure. The association has clear title dating back to the original development, which is why your modifications constitute such a serious violation." "And if you're wrong about that title?" Rebecca's smile turned sharp as winter steel. "Mr. Chen, we've done our due diligence. The association's claim is unassailable. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, your choice." One of the security men shifted his weight, jacket falling open just enough to reveal a shoulder holster. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear, but the kind of focused attention that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Vietnam and 30 years as a construction foreman. "I'll need some time to think about it," he said. "Of course, but don't take too long. The 30-day clock started ticking this morning." After they left, Marcus stood at his living room window, watching their black BMW disappear around the corner. Then he walked to his garage and pulled down the ladder to the attic. Elena had called it their museum. Boxes of photographs, documents, and memories accumulated over 4 decades. Marcus had avoided the space since her funeral, unable to face the archaeology of their life together. But today, he climbed those, creaking wooden steps with purpose. The filing cabinet sat in the far corner, a dented gray metal beast they'd bought at a government surplus sale in 1982. Elena had insisted on keeping all their important papers organized and accessible. "You never know when you might need proof of something," she'd said. Marcus pulled out the thick folder labeled Property Legal and spread its contents across the dusty floor. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, tax assessments, permits, for various home improvements over the years. And there, wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve, was the deed that would change everything. Grant deed, recorded March 15, 1952. Henry Chen, grantor, transfers to Marcus Chen, grantee, the following described property. Lots 4752, Willowbrook Township, including all structures thereon, specifically including the community building, constructed 1951. Marcus read it twice, then a third time to be sure. His father had been a quiet man, a first-generation immigrant who'd worked double shifts at the steel mill to buy this land when Willowbrook was nothing but farmland and dreams. The community center hadn't been built by the HOA in 1987. It had Been built by Henry Chen and his neighbors in 1951, a testament to the power of people working together toward a common goal. The HOA had simply assumed ownership when they'd incorporated the neighborhood, probably relying on outdated surveys and faulty assumptions. For 35 years, no one had bothered to check the actual legal ownership of the building at the heart of their community. Marcus carefully photographed the deed with his phone, then made copies on the ancient printer Elena had insisted on keeping in the attic for emergencies. His hands were steady now, the earlier tremor gone. He felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. At 5 p.m. sharp, he called Hoffman, Kress, and Associates. Bradley Hoffman. This is Marcus Chen. About that community center. Ah, Mr. Chen, I hope you've reconsidered our generous offer. I have. But first, I need you to answer a question. I'm listening. What year was the Willowbrook Community Center built? A pause. As I mentioned, the association established the facility when the development was incorporated in 1987. Wrong answer, counselor. Try 1951. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not sure what you're driving at, but I'm driving at the fact that you're trying to fine me $1 million for modifying a building I've owned since my father died in 1978. The silence stretched so long, Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Hoffman cleared his throat. 3 days after Marcus's revelation at the community center, the attacks began in earnest. The first salvo came disguised as a routine building inspection. Marcus was nursing his morning coffee when the doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m., followed immediately by aggressive pounding that rattled the frame. "City Building Department," called a gravelly voice. "Mandatory safety inspection." Through the peephole, Marcus saw a heavy-set man in a hard hat holding an official-looking clipboard. Behind him stood 2 younger men in matching city uniforms, their faces wearing the bored expressions of bureaucrats executing orders from above. Marcus opened the door, but kept the chain latch engaged. "I didn't request an inspection." "Don't need to request one, Pops. Got a complaint about structural modifications to a commercial building. Need to verify compliance with current codes." "Commercial building?" "The community center. Records show you as the owner, so we're checking the whole property for violations." Marcus studied the man's face, noting the slight smirk that suggested this wasn't routine at all. Someone had made a phone call, pulled some strings, activated the machinery of municipal bureaucracy. "You got a warrant?" "Don't need one for safety inspections. You can let us in voluntarily, or we can come back with code enforcement and police. Backup. Your choice." Marcus unlatched the chain and stepped back. The 3 men filed in like stormtroopers, their heavy boots tracking mud across Elena's Persian rugs. The lead inspector, his badge read D. Murphy, pulled out a tablet and began documenting everything with the methodical precision of a man who'd done this before. "Electrical outlets near water sources," Murphy muttered, photographing the kitchen sink area. "Potential code violation. That outlet's been there for 20 years. Code changes, Pops. Grandfathering only goes so far." They moved through the house like locusts, finding fault with everything from window heights to stair riser dimensions. The handrail Marcus had installed for Elena's wheelchair became a non-compliant accessibility modification. The ramp outside the community center was improperly graded and lacking required permits. 2 hours later, Murphy handed Marcus a citation thick enough to be a novella. 17 separate violations, Murphy announced with satisfaction. Total fines, $87,000. You've got 30 days to remediate or face additional penalties and possible condemnation proceedings. After they left, Marcus sat at his kitchen table staring at the citation. Every violation was technically valid but practically meaningless. The bow. Kinda nitpicking that happened when city officials had marching orders from people with influence. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Amanda Pierce from the Willowbrook Gazette. I'm doing a story about the community center ownership dispute and wondered if you'd like to comment." Marcus's radar went up immediately. The Willowbrook Gazette was little more than a neighborhood newsletter, but it reached every household in the development. What kind of story? Well, there are concerns in the community about one person claiming ownership of a facility that everyone thought belonged to the neighborhood. Some residents are worried about precedent, property values, that sort of thing. And who exactly raised these concerns? I'm not at liberty to reveal my sources, but I can tell you there's been quite a bit of discussion about your claims. Some people are questioning whether the deed you've produced is authentic, whether you have the right to unilaterally change the arrangement that's been in place for decades. Marcus closed his eyes. Character assassination. The oldest trick in the book. Ms. Pierce, have you actually seen my deed? Verified it with the county recorder's office? Well, no, but then maybe you should do some actual journalism before you print gossip and speculation. He hung up, but the damage was already being done. By evening, his neighbor across the street, Dorothy Williams, had called 3 times, asking if it was true that he was planning to sell the community center to developers. By morning, 2 more neighbors had stopped by to express their concerns about his intentions. The whisper campaign was in full swing. Marcus was pulling weeds in Elena's garden when Tommy arrived for lunch on Thursday, his young face tight with worry. "Grandpa, we need to talk." They sat on the back porch with sandwiches neither touched. Tommy pulled out a legal pad covered with notes in his careful handwriting. "I've been researching everything you asked about. The good news is your title. Claim is rock solid. Dad's deed is legitimate, properly recorded, and there's a clear chain of ownership dating back to 1952. And the bad news? They're coming at this from multiple angles. The building inspection was just the beginning." Tommy flipped through his notes. "I've got a friend who clerks at the courthouse. 3 separate actions have been filed against you in the past 48 hours. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of actions?" "First, the HOA is seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent you from changing the locks or restricting access to the community center. They're claiming irreparable harm to the community." "On what grounds?" "Adverse possession and implied easement. They're arguing that 35 years of continuous use creates an irrevocable right to access, regardless of technical ownership." Tommy flipped a page. "Second, the city is moving to condemn the property for code violations. If they succeed, they can force a sale at below market value." "And the third?" "This one's creative. A class action suit filed by neighborhood residents, claiming you violated the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment by threatening to disrupt community activities. They're seeking damages and injunctive relief." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Quiet enjoyment. They're suing me for disturbing their peace by asserting my property rights." "Grandpa, these aren't nuisance suits. Each one has been filed by major law firms with serious resources behind them. This isn't the local HOA playing hardball. Someone with deep pockets is bankrolling this campaign." "Kessler. That'd be my guess. And if I'm right, this is just the opening round. They're trying to overwhelm you with legal costs and bureaucratic harassment until you give up and sell." Marcus stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out over the neighborhood he'd called home for 4 decades. Modest houses with well-tended yards, children's bicycles scattered on driveways, the rhythms of ordinary life continuing despite the legal war being waged in family rooms and law offices. "What would Elena do?" he asked, more to himself than to Tommy. "Fight," his grandson answered immediately. "Grandma never backed down from anything she believed in." That afternoon, Marcus made 2 phone calls. The first was to Harold Nakamura, a retired Marine colonel who'd moved to Willowbrook 5 years earlier and quickly established himself as the neighborhood's unofficial ombudsman for dealing with City Hall. "Harry, it's Marcus Chen. I need a favor." "Name it." "I need to know who's been making phone calls to the building department. Someone with enough juice to fast-track inspections and code enforcement. Give me 6 hours." The second call went to his bank. "This is Marcus Chen. I need to discuss a home equity line of credit. Substantial amount. How substantial? Let's start with $500,000 and see if that covers the legal bills." That evening, Harry Nakamura arrived at Marcus's door with a bottle of bourbon and a manila folder thick with documents. "You picked a fight with the right people," Harry said, settling into Elena's chair like he belonged there. "Or the wrong people, depending on your perspective." He opened the folder and spread photographs across the coffee table. Building Inspector Murphy's been making regular visits to Kessler Development's offices for the past 6 months. Always. Leaves with envelopes that aren't inspection reports. Kickbacks? More like consulting fees if you're being charitable. Murphy's been supplementing his city salary with private work for developers who need things expedited or overlooked. Harry pulled out more documents. But here's where it gets interesting. Kessler's been quietly assembling a portfolio of Willowbrook properties for the past 3 years. He's purchased or has contracts on nearly 40% of the neighborhood. Marcus studied a map showing Kessler's acquisitions in red. The pattern was unmistakable, a systematic campaign to control the heart of Willowbrook. He's planning to redevelop the entire area, Marcus realized. Tear down the old houses, put up luxury condos and townhomes, triple the density, quadruple the profits. But there's one problem. Harry pointed to the community center on the map, conspicuously unmarked. The community center is the heart of the neighborhood. Without it, Willowbrook is just another collection of aging houses on valuable land. But with it, there's community identity, historical significance, neighborhood character that makes redevelopment politically difficult. So he needs to control the community center, or eliminate it entirely. If he can force you to sell, the building disappears and the neighborhood loses its focal point. Suddenly, there's no organized opposition to his development plans. Marcus poured 2 glasses of bourbon, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what Harry was revealing. "How much time do I have?" "Hard to say. The legal actions will take months to resolve, but city bureaucracy moves faster. They could condemn the property in weeks if Murphy finds enough violations. And if they condemn it? Forced sale at assessed value, not market value. You'd get maybe $400,000. The 48-hour deadline passed without incident, which made Marcus more nervous than any overt threat could have. In his experience, when dangerous men went silent, they were usually preparing something worse than words. He found out what? At 3:17 a.m., when Jake's perimeter alarm screamed like banshees throughout the house. Marcus rolled out of bed with reflexes that surprised him, muscle memory from decades past overriding arthritic joints and sleep-clouded thoughts. Jake appeared in the hallway like a ghost, tactical vest over his t-shirt, pistol in hand. 2 vehicles, northeast corner, Jake whispered. Professional approach, no lights, coordinated movement. They moved to the living room windows, staying low and away from the glass. Through the security monitors, Marcus could see dark figures positioning themselves around his property with military precision, not burglars or random vandals. This was a tactical operation. "Police?" Marcus asked. Jake studied the screens, noting equipment and movement patterns. "Wrong gear. These guys are private sector." One of the figures approached the front door, carrying what looked like an official document. Marcus activated the intercom system Jake had installed. "Marcus Chen, this is Deputy Marshal Williams with the Federal Court Enforcement Division. We have a warrant for your immediate eviction and property seizure. Open the door and come out with your hands visible." Jake was already moving, grabbing a duffel bag from behind the couch. "Emergency exfil plan. Back door through the neighbor's yard. Rally point is my truck 3 blocks over." "Wait." Marcus studied the figure at his door more carefully. Something was wrong with the picture. Federal marshals don't operate at 3 in the morning unless it's an active crime scene. He activated the porch lights, flooding the front yard with brilliant illumination. The figure at the door immediately stepped back, but not before Marcus caught a clear view of his face in the security camera. "That's not a federal marshal," Marcus said. "That's one of Murphy's building inspectors." Jake's expression went cold. Then this is a home invasion disguised as official business. Marcus reached for his phone to call 911, but Jake caught his wrist. Think about it. If they're willing to impersonate federal agents, they've got enough juice to control the local. Response: call the police, and the guys who show up might be real cops who think they're responding to a legitimate federal operation. So what do? Jake smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. We give them what they're not expecting. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat in his kitchen in handcuffs while armed men ransacked his house. They'd breached the front door with professional efficiency after Marcus had surrendered and allowed them entry. The leader, a thick-necked man who introduced himself as Marshal Williams, directed the search with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Property seizure for federal tax liens, Williams explained, consulting a clipboard that looked official enough to fool most people. All documents, financial records, and valuable items are subject to confiscation pending review. Marcus watched them work, noting how they focused on specific areas: his filing cabinets, his home office, anywhere he might keep important documents. They weren't here to arrest him or actually seize his property for taxes. They were here to steal his deed and any other documentation that supported his ownership claim. The deed you're looking for isn't here, Marcus said quietly. Williams looked up from the filing cabinet he'd been rifling through. What deed? The one to the community center, the document that's been causing your boss so much trouble. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus almost smiled. Amateur hour. Real federal agents would have maintained the fiction better. It's in a safety deposit box downtown, along with copies of every document, photograph, and piece of evidence I've collected over the past week. Williams's jaw tightened. He grabbed Marcus by the shirt and yanked him to his feet. Which bank? Which box number? Now why would I tell you that? The punch caught Marcus across the jaw, snapping his head back and filling his mouth with blood. Not the first time he'd been hit. Wouldn't be the last if he lived through this. Because if you don't, this goes very badly for you. Marcus spat, blood onto his kitchen floor. Badly? You mean worse than breaking into my house and assaulting me while impersonating federal agents? Williams raised his fist again, but one of his men caught his arm. Boss, we got company. Through the kitchen window, Marcus could see flashing red and blue lights approaching. Multiple vehicles moving fast. Williams cursed and keyed his radio. All units, abort and withdraw. Repeat, abort and withdraw. But it was too late. The house was already surrounded. The front door exploded inward, again, and this time real federal agents poured through, wearing genuine FBI tactical gear and shouting genuine federal commands. Federal agents, everyone on the ground, now! The fake marshals tried to maintain their cover story, but the lead FBI agent, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, wasn't buying it. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI, she announced, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat at the familiar surname. And you gentlemen are under arrest for impersonating federal officers, breaking and entering, and assault. As handcuffs clicked around Williams's wrists, Marcus caught Agent Chen's eye. Any relation to Marcus Chen? She asked. My granddaughter, Marcus replied, still tasting blood. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a slight nod of acknowledgement. Well, Mr. Chen, it appears you've been the victim of a very sophisticated home invasion. We'll need a full statement. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in the FBI field office downtown while Sarah took his statement. The family resemblance was unmistakable. She had Elena's eyes and the Chen family's stubborn jawline. I haven't seen you since you were 10 years old, Marcus said when they were finally alone. Grandpa Marcus. Sarah's professional demeanor softened slightly. Mom told me about Grandma Elena. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the funeral. You were working. I was working a case that sounds remarkably similar to what you're dealing with now. Sarah pulled out a thick file and spread photographs across the conference table. Marcus recognized Richard Kessler in several of them. along with the fake Marshall Williams and building inspector Murphy. Kessler development has been on our radar for 2 years, Sarah explained. Federal investigation into racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy. The problem is proving criminal intent versus aggressive, but legal business practices. What about tonight? Tonight gives us evidence of felony crimes, impersonating federal officers, breaking and entering, assault. Enough to pressure the muscle into flipping on their employers. Marcus studied the surveillance photos. How long have you been watching them? Long enough to know you're in serious danger. Williams and his team aren't just muscle for hire. They're ex-military contractors with a history of making problems disappear permanently. Like Catherine Morrison? Sarah's eyebrows rose. You know about Catherine. My grandson Tommy did. Some research. House fire, ruled accidental, but the timing was suspicious. We've been investigating that death for 18 months. Can't prove anything, but the pattern suggests arson made to look like faulty wiring. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of revelation. So this is bigger than just my property dispute. Much bigger. Kessler's been running this same playbook across 3 states. Identify valuable properties, use intimidation, and bureaucratic manipulation to force sales, redevelop at massive profits. The estimated value of his illegal acquisitions is over $200 million. And the community center is the keystone to his largest project yet. Willowbrook sits on some of the most valuable undeveloped land in the county. But as long as there's an active community center creating neighborhood identity, local politicians won't approve the kind of massive redevelopment he's planning. Sarah pulled out a map showing Kessler's Willowbrook acquisitions. The pattern was even more extensive than Harry Nakamura had revealed. He's purchased 60% of the neighborhood in the past 3 years. Most sellers don't realize they're dealing with Kessler. He uses shell companies and straw buyers to hide his involvement until someone refuses to sell. Exactly. Then the problems start. Code violations, tax audits, legal harassment, physical intimidation. Most people eventually give up and take whatever offer is on the table. Marcus touched his swollen jaw where Williams had hit him. But not Catherine Morrison? Catherine Morrison fought back for 8 months, filed complaints with the city, organized neighborhood opposition, even hired a lawyer to investigate Kessler's business practices. And then her house burned down. Along with all her research and documentation about Kessler's activities. They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the implications. Outside the conference room, Marcus could hear the normal sounds of law enforcement at work. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of people pursuing justice within the constraints of legal process. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Okay. If I keep fighting this, am I going to end up like Catherine Morrison? Sarah met his eyes directly. Possibly. Kessler's getting desperate. You've cost him face, time, and money. The federal investigation is closing in, and he knows it. Desperate men make dangerous decisions. Then why haven't you arrested him? Bex. The Willowbrook Country Club's dining room was empty except for Richard Kessler, who sat at a corner table with the casual confidence of a man in his natural habitat. 2 security guards flanked the entrance, their suits unable to completely hide the bulges of shoulder holsters. Marcus approached the table steadily, noting exits and angles, falling back on tactical awareness he'd hoped never to need again. Kessler gestured to the chair across from him with a smile that never reached his eyes. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. Drink? I'm fine. Marcus settled into the chair, keeping his hands visible on the table. The weight of the Colt against his ribs was both comforting and terrifying, a last resort he prayed he wouldn't need. Kessler poured himself 3 fingers of what looked like expensive scotch. Quite a performance this morning. Very theatrical. I particularly enjoyed the part about my systematic campaign of intimidation. Truth often sounds dramatic when it's finally spoken out loud. Truth? Kessler laughed. but the sound held no warmth. "Mr. Chen, let me share some truth with you. I've been developing properties for 25 years. I employ over 200 people, contribute millions in tax revenue, and transform blighted neighborhoods into thriving communities. What you call intimidation, I call business. What I call intimidation, most people call felony assault and home invasion." Kessler's smile widened. "Ah, yes, last night's unfortunate misunderstanding. I understand some men impersonating federal agents broke into your home? Terrible thing. I hope the real FBI catches them." The casual denial was perfectly calculated. Plausible deniability wrapped in mock concern. Marcus had dealt with enough corrupt contractors over the years to recognize the pattern. They already did catch them. In fact, they're being very cooperative about who hired them. For the first time, Kessler's composure slipped slightly, a tightening around his eyes, a fractional pause before he lifted his glass. "Is that so? Well, I'm sure the authorities will sort it all out." Marcus leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen, Kessler. You're going to call off your dogs, stop harassing my neighbors, and find a different neighborhood to destroy. In return, I won't press for the maximum federal penalties for what your people did to me last night. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that a man with nothing left to lose can be very dangerous to someone with everything to protect." Kessler set down his glass with deliberate precision. "Mr. Chen, I think you misunderstand the situation. You're not in a position to make demands." He gestured almost imperceptibly, and Marcus heard footsteps approaching from behind, 2 more security guards moving to block his retreat to the main dining room. "You see, last night's visit was indeed a misunderstanding. My associates were supposed to retrieve certain documents and ensure your cooperation through persuasion. Instead, they bungled the job and got arrested." Marcus kept his hands steady on the table, hyper-aware of the Colt's weight against his ribs. "So you're cleaning up loose ends?" "I'm resolving a business problem. You've become a significant obstacle to a very important project. The Willowbrook redevelopment represents a $250 million investment that will create jobs, increase tax revenue, and transform a declining neighborhood. By displacing the people who live there, by replacing obsolete housing with modern, efficient alternatives. Progress, Mr. Chen, something your generation seems to have trouble understanding." Kessler pulled out his phone and showed Marcus an architectural rendering of the proposed development. Where modest single-family homes currently stood, the image showed gleaming towers of glass and steel, luxury condominiums that would sell for millions each. "Beautiful, isn't it? But there's one problem." Kessler zoomed in on the center of the development, where the community center currently stood. "That ugly little building disrupts the entire flow of the project. Community activists use it as a rallying point against progress. It has to go." "And if I refuse to sell?" "Oh, Mr. Chen, selling is no longer an option. After this morning's press conference, you've become too much of a liability. No, I'm afraid we're going to have to explore more permanent solutions." The guards behind Marcus moved closer. He could hear their breathing, smell their cologne. Amateur hour. Real professionals would have maintained distance until the moment of action. "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about an unfortunate accident. Elderly man, recent emotional trauma from his wife's death, escalating conflicts with neighbors. Tragic suicide, really. Though we'll make sure he leaves a note explaining how overwhelmed he felt by all the legal troubles." Marcus smiled, genuinely amused for the first time all evening. "You know what your problem is, Kessler?" "Enlighten me." "You're so used to intimidating people that you've forgotten how to recognize when someone isn't afraid of you." Marcus's hand moved faster than his arthritis should have allowed, muscle memory and adrenaline overriding the limitations of age. The Colt appeared in his grip like magic, barrel pressed against Kessler's forehead before the developer could blink. The security guards behind him reacted immediately, weapons appearing with professional speed, but Marcus had anticipated that. "Easy, boys," he said, without taking his eyes off Kessler. "Your boss is about 3 pounds of trigger pressure away from redecorating this wall with his brains." "You're insane," Kessler whispered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the dining room's cool air. "I'm a Marine who spent 2 tours in Vietnam killing people who thought they were smarter than me. I'm a construction foreman who stared down union bosses and mob enforcers, and I'm a widower who's already buried the only person in this world I couldn't live without." Marcus leaned closer, the gun barrel never wavering. "So tell me, Kessler, what exactly do you think you can threaten me with?" The silence stretched taut as a wire. Behind him, Marcus could hear the guards breathing heavily, torn between protecting their employer and avoiding a massacre in a, public place. "Now, here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued conversationally. "You're going to tell your boys to put their guns away and step back. Then you're going to call whoever you need to call to make all this legal harassment stop. And finally, you're going to find a different neighborhood to destroy. And if I refuse, then I pull this trigger, your boys shoot me, and we all die together. Think your $250 million development will survive the headlines about a shootout in the country club dining room?" Kessler's eyes darted to his security team, calculating odds and consequences. Marcus could see him running scenarios, looking for angles. But the mathematics were simple. At this range, with a gun pressed against his skull, Kessler would die regardless of what happened. "Next, stand down," Kessler said quietly. "Boss?" "I said stand down. Put your weapons away and step back." Reluctantly, the guards holstered their pistols and moved away from the table. Marcus kept the Colt pressed against Kessler's forehead, feeling the developer's pulse through the gun barrel. "Good. Now call off the building inspectors, the legal harassment, all of it. I can't just—" "You can and you will, because the alternative is that your brains spend the rest of eternity as part of the country club's carpet." Kessler reached slowly for his phone, hands shaking as he scrolled through contacts. Marcus watched him make 3 calls, to his lawyer, to someone at the city building department, and to a number that answered Morrison. "Janet, it's Richard. Call off the legal actions against Marcus Chen. All of them. Immediately." After the calls, Marcus eased back slightly but kept the gun trained on Kessler's chest. "Now comes the hard part." "What?" "You're going to confess everything. The bribes, the intimidation, the fake federal agents, Catherine Morrison's murder, all of it. You're insane if you think—" Marcus cocked the hammer on the Colt, the metallic click echoing through the dining room like a death sentence. "I'm old, Kessler. Cancer's eating my liver, and I've got maybe 6 months left. You think I won't trade those months to see you in prison?" That was a lie. Marcus's health was fine, but delivered with the conviction of a man facing his own mortality. "Even if I wanted to confess, which I don't, it would be worthless. Coerced testimony, inadmissible in court." "Who said anything about court?" Marcus pulled out his phone with his free hand, showing Kessler the screen. A video call was active, with FBI agent Sarah Chen visible in the tiny window. "Special Agent Chen has been listening to our entire conversation. Everything you've said tonight, the threats, the admission about last night's home invasion, your little speech about permanent solutions, it's all been recorded." Kessler's face went white as he realized the scope of the trap he'd walked into. "You can't record without consent. It's inadmissible. In a private conversation, maybe, but this is a public place and you've been making terrorist threats. Different rules apply." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "Mr. Kessler, this is FBI Special Agent Chen. You are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and making terroristic threats. The building is surrounded, and agents are moving in now." As if summoned by her words, the dining room doors burst open and FBI tactical teams swarmed in, weapons drawn and shouting commands. Marcus slowly placed his Colt on the table and raised his hands, relief flooding through him as professional law enforcement took control of the situation. Kessler was still sitting in shock. The Bentley's headlights swept across Marcus's front yard like searchlights as it pulled into his driveway, engine ticking as it cooled in the sudden silence. Through his living room window, Marcus could see Kessler's silhouette behind the wheel, motionless, calculating, preparing for whatever came next. "Backup is 5 minutes out," Sarah whispered into her radio, crouched behind the kitchen counter with her service weapon drawn. "Suspect is on scene, vehicle disabled." Marcus had insisted on being inside the house despite Sarah's protests. This was his home, his fight, and he wouldn't cower in some FBI safe house while Kessler brought the war to his doorstep. The car door slammed with finality. Footsteps crunched across the gravel driveway, slow, deliberate, the pace of a man who'd made peace with whatever he was about to do. "Marcus Chen," Kessler's voice carried across the night air, calm and conversational despite the circumstances. "I know you're in there. We need to finish our conversation." Marcus moved to the front window, staying back from the glass. Kessler stood in the middle of his front yard, hands empty and visible, wearing the same expensive suit from the country club. But something in his posture suggested coiled violence, a predator preparing to strike. "Nothing left to talk about," Marcus called back. "You're going to prison, Kessler. It's over." "Over?" Kessler laughed, and the sound held genuine amusement. "Mr. Chen, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I have federal judges in my pocket, senators who owe me favors, and enough offshore accounts to disappear forever if necessary." He took a step closer to the house. "But I don't want to disappear. I want to finish what we started." Sarah keyed her radio again. "Where's that backup?" "ETA 3 minutes." 3 minutes. In Marcus's experience, 3 minutes could be a lifetime when men with guns were deciding whether to kill each other. "You know what your problem is, Chen?" Kessler continued, beginning to pace in front of the house like a caged animal. "You think this is about right and wrong, good versus evil. But it's not. It's about power. I have it, you don't. And no amount of stubborn principle will change that fundamental reality." "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but sometimes stubborn principle is enough." He could see movement in his peripheral vision. Jake Ramirez emerging from the shadow of the garage, moving with the silent precision of a man who'd done this before. Kessler hadn't spotted him yet, but that would change the moment Jake got closer. "I offered you a generous settlement," Kessler called out. "More money than you could spend in your remaining years. But you chose to make this personal. You made it personal when you threatened my wife's building. Your wife is dead. Chen, the building is just wood and brick. Why die for something that doesn't matter?" Marcus felt something cold and final settle in his chest. "Because it matters to the people who are still alive. Because community isn't just a word developers use to sell condos. Because some things are worth more than money." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of irreconcilable differences. Then Kessler reached inside his jacket. "Sarah, he's going for a weapon," Marcus said quietly. But Sarah was already moving, emerging from the kitchen with her FBI credentials held high. "Federal agent, drop your weapon and get on the ground!" Kessler's hand froze halfway to his shoulder holster. For a moment, the tableau held predator and prey suspended in the moment before violence erupted. Then Kessler smiled. "Special Agent Chen, Marcus's granddaughter, I presume? Tell me, does it bother you that your grandfather's vigilante justice makes a mockery of everything you've sworn to uphold? The only thing that bothers me is criminals who think they're above the law." "Above the law?" Kessler pulled his hand away from his jacket, showing empty palms. "Agent Chen, I haven't broken any laws tonight. I'm having a conversation with a neighbor on public property. You're violating the terms of your bail by approaching a federal witness." "Am I? My bail conditions prohibit contact with witnesses in my case, but Mr. Chen isn't a witness. He's a victim who happens to be related to the arresting agent. Conflict of interest, wouldn't you say? Sarah's expression tightened. Marcus could see her calculating the legal implications, wondering if Kessler's lawyers had found an angle that could compromise the entire case. Besides, Kessler continued, I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to make one final offer. He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a legal document. $5 million for the community center property. Cash, immediate transfer, no questions asked. Take the money and disappear, Mr. Chen. Start over somewhere else. Not interested. 10 million. Still not interested. Kessler's composure finally cracked. What is wrong with you? I'm offering you generational wealth for a building that's worth maybe 400,000 on the open market. Because it's not about the money, Marcus said, stepping onto his front porch where Kessler could see him clearly. It never was about the money. It's about the fact that you can't buy everything, and you can't intimidate everyone, and sometimes ordinary people draw a line and refuse to be moved. Ordinary people, Kessler spat. Ordinary people are sheep who do what they're told and take what they're offered. You're just too stupid to recognize reality. Marcus walked down his front steps, ignoring Sarah's sharp intake of breath. He stopped 10 feet from Kessler, close enough to see the rage and desperation in the developer's eyes. Reality is that your empire is finished. Tonight's recording will put you away for decades. Your associates are already cutting deals to reduce their sentences, and everyone in Willowbrook now knows exactly what kind of man you are. You think that matters? You think justice actually exists? Kessler's hand drifted toward his jacket again. Mr. Chen, let me show you what reality looks like. This time, his draw was smooth and fast, the practiced motion of someone who'd done this before. The pistol appeared in his hand with deadly efficiency, barrel swinging toward Marcus's chest, but Marcus was already moving, muscle memory overriding arthritis and age. He dove left as the first shot shattered the night air, rolling behind his car as bullets sparked off metal and concrete. Sarah's return fire was immediate and accurate, 3 controlled shots that dropped Kessler to his knees, his pistol spinning, away across the gravel. Federal agent! Suspect down! Need medical and backup now! Jake emerged from the shadows, his own weapon trained on Kessler's still form. Marcus climbed slowly to his feet, ears ringing from the gunfire, adrenaline making his hands shake. Kessler was still alive, but fading fast, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. Sarah knelt beside him, applying pressure to the wounds with professional efficiency. Why? Marcus asked, standing over the man who'd tried to destroy his community. You had money, power, influence? Why risk it all for one building? Kessler's eyes found Marcus's face, and for a moment the mask of civilized respectability fell away completely. Because you embarrassed me, made me look weak. Can't allow that in my business. Your business is over. Others will come. Always others. Kessler's voice was growing weaker, but his eyes held malicious satisfaction. Willowbrook, prime real estate, won't stay unchanged forever. Maybe not, Marcus said quietly. But it'll stay unchanged long enough for the people who live there now to have good lives in the place they call home. By the time the ambulance arrived, Kessler was unconscious. The EMTs worked over him with professional competence, but Marcus could see in their faces that it was likely too late. Sarah's shots had been well placed and devastating. Self-defense, Sarah said as investigators began processing the scene. He drew first, fired first, multiple witnesses. Marcus nodded, watching the emergency vehicles turn his quiet street into a carnival of flashing lights and official activity. Neighbors were emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity and concern. Dorothy Williams from across the street approached cautiously. Marcus, is everything all right? It is now, Dorothy. It is now. As dawn broke over Willowbrook, Marcus stood in his backyard looking out over the community center. The building looked exactly as it had the day before, modest, functional, unremarkable to anyone who didn't understand its significance. But significance wasn't about architecture or property values. It was about the piano teacher who'd spent 40 years nurturing young talent, the senior citizens who gathered for exercise classes and friendly gossip, the neighborhood association meetings where residents debated parking ordinances with the passionate intensity of Congress, arguing war and peace. Sarah found him there an hour later, exhaustion and relief warring across her features. "How is he?" Marcus asked. "Surgery went well. He'll live to stand trial." She sat heavily in one of Elena's garden chairs. "His lawyers are already claiming temporary insanity duress, claiming his confession was coerced. Will it stick?" "Doubtful. We have too much corroborating evidence, too many witnesses, too clear a pattern of criminal behavior. The recordings from last night just seal the deal." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over their neighborhood. In a few hours, the community center would open its doors to another day of ordinary activities. Art, classes and book clubs, and the small rituals that made a collection of houses into something larger than the sum of its parts.